Hi everyone, this is Mari Craig, and you're listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show, a podcast where we discuss how we can achieve more wellness in our lives one small step at a time. For the past 6 odd years, I've taken a special interest in nutrition and I've changed the diet of my family on its head. But as I've dived deeper into the world of nutrition, I have learned that health is so much more than just what we put on our plate. This is why on this podcast we will be talking nutrition, mental health, being in alignment, holistic health care, self care, raising children, and more. We will also be hearing stories of women's journeys to overcome trauma and what it has taught them on the way. When we share our stories, we realize we are not alone and that things can change for the better. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey as I explore what health and wellness truly encompass. If you like what you're hearing, please consider rating the show with a 5-star rating and sharing it with your friends. It really makes a big difference. Now, on with today's show. Hello and welcome to the Small Steps to Wellness show with me, your host, Mari Craig, where we discuss how we can achieve more wellness in our lives, one small step at a time. I have a guest with me today, Henna Bostrom. That's not how we say it in English. In English, we'll say Bostrom. But, you know, being Nordic and all, I should pronounce it the way it should be pronounced. She's a nutritionist. And the reason why I've invited Henna on today's show is because she's also a diagnosed celiac. She has a lifetime of experience in dealing with this sometimes debilitating and limiting conditions. She is going to talk to us a little bit about what celiac disease is, kind of how many people tend to have it, how it can present itself, and then we also are going to look at some solutions. I think that's all I'm going to say as an introduction, because we'll be talking about so many things. So yeah, welcome, Henna.
Thank you for having me. So it's lovely to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you could be on, because it's become almost a bit of like a trend that people are gluten free, because we have this idea. I don't know, I mean, whoever came up with that, it must be making so much money from whatever brand they created. But for you, having the diagnosis of the autoimmune condition that is celiac disease, that is slightly different. Do you, if somebody comes and says to you, what does that mean? What is this? What's celiac disease? What do you say? What would you how would you describe it?
So yes, you have all the right words there. So celiac disease is an autoimmune condition which can be triggered at any stage of your life if you have the genetic makeup to be susceptible of getting it. So not everyone with those genes gets it, but then some of us do. And how I explain it is that the condition causes our own immune system attacking gluten. That's a protein that's present in wheat, barley, and rye. And gluten, regular oats are cross-contaminated with it. So we can't have it when we're celiac. Because our body's immune system attacks it and causes damage in our lining of the small intestine. If you remember from science, those little finger-like projections called villi will be flattened, and we are not then able to absorb the nutrients that we need. And that will cause all sorts of havoc in our bodies. And that's why there's so many presentations of the illness, and it can have like long-term health problems because of that. And it can be very debilitating if it's going on undiagnosed for a very long time. And that can happen because it's still not as well recognized as it should be.
I wonder maybe if the whole sort of, I suppose, trend of being gluten-free, whether that's kind of ruining a little bit for those who have really big issues with gluten intolerance or with celiac disease. Maybe that's, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a sort of, there's many sides to this thing. So the good thing is that when there's sort of, there is a fad of gluten-free, and the hard misconception that gluten-free is healthier than regular gluten grains are. Like eating gluten-free is a healthier option. Because there's this buzz, it gives us often more options with more gluten-free products being around, and so that it's been, because then the market is bigger and you can market to a bigger audience, which means more sales and more money, so there's more options. However, it's problematic in several ways, because one thing is that people that don't need to eat gluten-free because of their medical conditions avoid gluten and end up paying more for food than they need to. The other thing is that people that are actually celiac cut gluten out before they are diagnosed, and then they aren't able to be diagnosed because you have to have gluten in your diet to get those tests done, otherwise they're not reliable. And if they're not diagnosed, they don't necessarily know to avoid gluten to the 100% gluten-free extent that you need to be for celiac to be like symptom-free. Mm-hmm. And that can cause health issues down the line, because they're sort of gluten-free, but for celiac sort of isn't enough. So that's, again, one of the issues. And then there's the most annoying issue is that when there's these people who sort of avoid gluten, but not all the time, then celiacs aren't necessarily taken seriously when they say that we have to eat gluten-free. And then we get all the eye rolls and, oh, are you sure you couldn't eat just a little bit? Because they see some people eat otherwise gluten-free, but when it's time for pudding, they're not gluten-free suddenly. So everyone's like, what's this? I don't understand this gluten-free stuff, because not everyone is the same.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Very good point there. So yeah, the market now is so much bigger, isn't it, than it was before. But it's a really, really interesting point that you raised about the health aspects, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But how long have you had the diagnosis then of celiac disease? And can you maybe share a little bit with me about what did you know about celiac disease before you had your diagnosis? When did you suspect it, or what's your journey been like?
Yeah, so as often with celiac disease, it's a bit of a long story, because it can take years and years for people to get diagnosed with celiac disease. I can't remember from the top of my head, but I know that the average time in the UK to get diagnosed is, I think, roughly around 15 years. Unless you're like a very sick baby and they now know to test it earlier. But before, it took very long time, and you need to be quite ill before anyone suspected it. But for me, I have the background of my dad being celiac. He got diagnosed when I was about 14, 15. And prior to that, as long as I can remember, I've known of celiac disease and gluten because my paternal aunt, my dad's sister, has dermatitis herpetiformis, which is sort of, we call it skin celiac. So it's a form of, or similar to celiac, but it's as a itchy, blistery rash on your skin. And she also has celiac disease. So I knew that my aunt was celiac and we couldn't have gluten around her, and we knew to avoid crumbs, and my mum made cakes with potato starch and that kind of thing. So I've known of gluten and celiac disease for as long as I can remember. And I have a history of having a weird stomach and weird symptoms and things, but I have been tested negative in the bloods for 3 times before I was actually then diagnosed positive. And how that all came about was that when I moved to the UK, I had figured out I had allergies or intolerances. I was intolerant to rice and corn. and I had a mild oat allergy or intolerance. But at that time, doctor said to me, don't cut away oats, like it's too important a grain, don't cut it out because it's only a mild allergy. And I kept it in and never thought about it twice because I didn't have celiac disease, I was tested. And when I came to the UK, that's, can't remember, 2014, already then I started to have these like strange stomach cramps, and a couple of times it was so painful that I was thinking, do I need to call an ambulance? And but never did. And then I went to doctors, and then I was said, oh, you probably have IBS with your history because you're negative. It's probably IBS because you don't have celiacs. And it was never tested again, celiac disease. And I didn't have an endoscopy, so gastroscopy, where they check your small intestine lining and take a biopsy to see if those villi have been flattened. So I'm not sure if I already had it then, but the medication that I got for my IBS and changes in diet, like I started to eat oatmeal, ironic, for breakfast, and eating more whole grains and less sugary stuff. I left onions for a while and then realized that that's not a trigger and that kind of thing. But I started to get on with my stomach and it was better. But then 2018, I went back to work and I started a teacher training as a science teacher in secondary school because I have a background in chemical engineering. So I thought, well, I could have the school holidays free and become a teacher because I love teaching and all the things. And it was like a paid position where I taught while I was learning to become a teacher, and the stress was very high. And while doing that, I struggled the first year. I was starting to get like really stressed and I couldn't sleep properly, and I had these weird symptoms where I was very tired and couldn't concentrate, and everything took so long and I was constantly tired, and I blamed it on stress. And then on my second year of teacher training, which is like the newly qualified teacher year, I started in a new school, and it's just started to spiral after that. So I was constantly tired, couldn't keep up with my work and couldn't make decisions. And I was sick every morning when I went to school. Like I often was sick before getting into my car, and my stomach was erratic. And I thought that, well, it's IBS flaring up because of the stress and it's anxiety and it's this and that. And then just before Christmas 2018, I was signed up from work and doctor said, we need to look at this. Like, we need to run tests. This isn't normal. And would you mind if we test celiac disease again? And I said, well, actually, because my stomach, I just can't get along with it, because I got it to a point where I didn't dare to go necessarily. Like sometimes I had to run from lessons to go to the facilities. And when I went to a restaurant, by the time we were having dessert, I've had to go to the toilets and I couldn't understand what was going on. So yes, then the blood tests were done again and I was tested positive for gluten antibodies, and they were quite, I can't remember, but I remember they were high. And then the doctor said that you're in such a bad nick that I would suggest that you start gluten-free straight away, even though we need to take your endoscopy, but you can restart eating gluten closer to the date, because it can be up to 6 months before you have the endoscopy. And you're in such a bad way that I want you to quit now. In hindsight, that wasn't a good piece of advice, but that's what I did. And then 3 weeks later, I was signed off from work for good because I couldn't return back. And then I decided to quit teaching because I knew that I was in such a condition. I got a nervous breakdown, and then I decided that it's not going to be 1 or 2 years until I'm fit to work again. So it's better for me to quit altogether. And this isn't working. So then I was signed off, which was a very good thing, because when I had to reintroduce gluten back to my diet, I could not have worked. I became so ill when I was eating gluten for the test, so that the endoscopy would show the damage. I'm quite sure it was damaged enough that it would have shown it, but that's the criteria for the tests. That if I had to do we call this gluten challenge, but you shouldn't be challenging gluten, because what I advise is that if you suspect gluten to be the issue, don't cut it out before you've tested, because it can cause all sorts of trouble, and you might end up not having a diagnosis because you can't get through to eating 6 weeks gluten for 6 weeks, at least 2 times a day, like equivalent of 4 slices of toast. And that was a lot. And I was so ill that I was crying on the phone to the doctor that I can't get through with it. And he said, no, just eat as much as you can, because when we get the results, you can cut straight away everything. And it's just the gluten in itself, when you're celiac, it can cause anxiety and depression. So it was gluten also affecting my mood. And yeah, it was tough. But then I had my endoscopy, which at that point was a relief to get an endoscopy done. And then the results were back 2 months later. But the date of the endoscopy, I could stop eating gluten. And then it started to get better. But it takes a while. So 7 months on that, then I started to feel like more of myself. But it took me 2 years to actually feel like, okay, now I'm healthy again. So it can be a long route.
Wow, that is a long journey indeed.
Yes.
Oh, I can't even imagine. Why do you think that the 3 tests you did, and you did those over in Finland, why do you think they were negative then, back then?
Because it's likely that I didn't have celiac disease then. But it's a little bit hard to say, because I did have an endoscopy, so a gastroscopy, so where you put camera down throat, the esophagus, and into the stomach, because they were thinking I have like my stomach has issues, like I have an ulcer or something. But they never went into my small intestine to biopsy it. So there's this Professor David Saunders who studies, he's in Sheffield, and he studies celiacs a lot. He's a gastroenterologist. And he has this theory that there's a point where you might be celiac, but it's not showing in your bloods yet. But you might have the villus atrophy. Or then you might have it the other way around as well.
Yeah.
So there's like these middle spaces that you sort of have it, but you don't, kind of thing. But the current knowledge is that if you have the gene, there's like, I think, was it 28 to 40% of population might have the gene, but not everyone that has the gene will then develop celiac disease. And there's something that triggers it, some sort of a stressful event that causes the immune system to overreact. And then, like I say, that when it sees gluten, then it carpet bombs everything, like takes no prisoners, and then it damages the small intestine. So I think it must have been the stress of the teaching and the sleepless nights and the bad eating patterns and everything that caused it. Or then I already had started to have celiac disease due to maybe childbirth or moving to UK or whatever reason. And then when I started to teach, my body just couldn't handle it, and everything started to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, you can ask yourself this question again and again, I suppose, but I guess that's one of the things with autoimmune diseases, isn't it? And that is that it can be there kind of not doing much, and then there's a stressful event of sorts that can trigger. And having trained as a secondary school teacher myself, I don't think I've ever done anything more stressful ever in my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of weight I lost from training to be a teacher. It's incredibly stressful.
Funnily enough, I just gained a lot of weight. Like that's the weird thing, that there's this misconception, even with medical professions, like doctors have said, when we had Celiac Awareness Week, I had people come and tell me that they have heard the same thing told to them by a doctor: you're overweight, you can't have celiac disease. I was well overweight and I had celiac disease because my body probably had adapted to just getting as much energy in as possible and using it very well. So there's these misconceptions also that make it harder to get a diagnosis, because they are looking at this textbook case and comparing to that. No, you can't have it because you aren't this or you are that. And that also makes it more difficult.
This is so interesting. We actually did a celiac test on our middle child a few years ago, because she had episodes where for weeks we'd have a really, really bad tummy, and she'd be sometimes still in nappies when these things would happen, and then sometimes not in nappies when we just have to put one on, because if she needed the toilet, we just had to grab the child and run. And I thought, this can't be right. This can't be right. So we took her off gluten and she was much better. I called the doctor and said, I think she should be tested. And the man I spoke to, he didn't even know what was required. So he's like, okay, you can come in kind of next week. I said, well, we've been off gluten for a while, so maybe we should have it for a bit or something like what. He's like, oh, I'm not sure actually, maybe a couple of weeks. And I can't remember how long we had it for in the end, and her test came back negative. But I wonder in hindsight whether we actually did it properly. She actually has a gluten-free diet mostly, because we do notice that she gets quite windy when she has it. And my youngest seems to react to it as well, but with constipation and lots of tummy aches. And I wonder if that has come from stresses with lots of antibiotics. Unfortunately, he's very little, lots of antibiotics, and that his gut bacteria just have to be replenished, and they can't quite do anything about or they can't break it down properly. So, but it's interesting what you're saying, because obviously you have the diagnosis, but in our case, it's a case of, for my daughter, certainly a little bit is not the problem, but it's the constant intake of it that for her seems to be problematic. And even for me as well, getting older, I look quite pregnant after shop bought bread, but not if I bake it myself. So it's interesting to hear your story, because we've never been sort of poorly like that, but I can eat normal pasta from a shop and I can look like I'm expecting a baby.
Yeah, there's so many things that we don't yet understand about the gut, and our approach still isn't multifaceted enough for all the complexity, because how the Western medicine is, it's very treatment based, and here's the medicine for this and here's the medicine for that, and that's the cure for this. But the holistic side and how our bodies work and what we put in our bodies, like doctors still don't get much nutritional training at all. And I do think we eat ourselves ill quite a lot. But it might be that gluten isn't necessarily always the culprit. But it can be other things like anti-nutrients in grains. Like anti-nutrients typically are substances that the grains produce so that different like fungi and insects, etc., don't eat the plant, so it protects itself. And some of us humans are better managing those, or their gut bacteria is better in managing those anti-nutrients, and then others are worse. And then that's why some people find that sourdough bread, suits them better than the regular yeasted bread from the shops, for example, because the sourdough is doing some of the digestion for them. And that's why, and it does also break away some of the gluten, but not enough for it to be safe with celiac disease. But gluten intolerant people might find it more agreeable because it's been broken down a bit. And there's a lot of theories and scientists arguing why do some people have problem with gluten, why some don't. And even if they don't have celiac disease, some suffer with non-celiac gluten intolerance or different sensitivities. And it can be that sometimes it's gluten, sometimes it's another chemical compound in those grains, or then it's your makeup of your gut bacteria.
Yes.
That they don't have the necessary training for that.
Yeah. And
So,
I guess it could also be a case of how is that grain itself been produced? What is that? What has it been sprayed with? Is it organic?
yes.
Is it non-organic? Is it? And I guess a lot of shop bought bread is also they've added gluten to the flour mix as well to make it stay together more. There's a lot of, I mean, this is why also I have been baking. Even if I bake normal bread, because I breastfeed my youngest, and I want to make sure that he doesn't get any at the moment because I can't be dealing with the sleepless nights of him screaming his head off. I don't have any gluten at the moment either. But when I bake normal bread, I know what's going into that. It's flour, yeast, water, salt, and maybe some seeds if I fancy it. But the shop bought stuff, the
There's
list
all
is long.
sorts.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's why, like, one of the reasons why I make my own is because I have different sensitivities. And even if when I cut out gluten, after the doctor, my gastroenterologist had said it's okay for you to cut away gluten. And I was then referred to a dietitian but it took 7 months to get to the dietitian. But when I got there, I knew more than the dietitian did. So she told me that. So to work out what I can't have and what's causing the issue, I had to make it myself so that I could isolate the culprit. And only by doing that I started to figure out that when I started to eat gluten-free, when I was diagnosed, I thought, well, I'll bring back rice and corn because I don't get a severe reaction from them. I don't think I'm that intolerant. And without eating rice and corn, gluten-free is very difficult because it's the main component in most commercial gluten-free products. And I thought this is too much because I was already a train wreck just to sort of manage it all. But when I started to eat those, I noticed that on those days that I cooked myself, I was doing better than on those days that I bought something from the shops. And that's why I started to understand that, okay, maybe the shop bought gluten-free flours aren't for me, and the shop bought bread is not for me. And then I had talked it over with the dietitian, and then we realized that I can't have gluten-free oats. There's a portion of celiacs that can't have the clean produced gluten-free oats. And the reason is that for most, that the protein in oats is just close enough for their immune system to think, looks similar, new kit. No, we're not having that. And that's why it causes similar symptoms that gluten grains do.
That's interesting because I was told something similar by a nutritionist friend. So for my baby, we've had millet porridge and we've had buckwheat porridge and quinoa flakes. He's not very keen on those. But lately, it's quite strong. He eats anything, but that he did spit out.
Yeah, but, the taste is a little bit potent. Maybe.
Yeah, but I think we've gone back now to gluten-free oats mainly, and it seems to be okay. But for a while we stayed off all of that. That's interesting.
Yeah, currently the recommendation is that if you are diagnosed with celiac disease, you are okay to start gluten-free oats at any point. The old guideline was to wait a year so that your gut has time to heal itself before it's introduced, because it's sort of like you're still sensitive of all the damage. You might not get along so well. So I did it the safe way. So like I thought, well, because I have had the allergy results come back like mild positive for mild allergy for oats, I wait. And then I thought for a while that I'm fine with it, but then I just know there's actual pattern that when I have oats, I'm really ill. For me, I think it's more the allergy route than the gluten mimicking thing, but I don't know for sure, so I just keep them out. And,
yeah, what you know is that if you have it, you get poorly, so let's not go there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So you have your diagnosis, you go to the dietitian, and then you realize there's other things also that I probably shouldn't be having. So at what point do you go, right, I need to bake my own bread? Because that's how I found out about you, because I'll do a shout out to Love Grass Ethiopia. I think they shared one of your posts.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that looks interesting what she's doing. And that's how I found you, I think, anyway.
Yeah.
But at what point did you decide I just need to do this myself?
It was mainly when I noticed that I started having migraines when I was eating gluten-free products, and then I gave up bread altogether. Like I was like, I haven't got the energy, I haven't got the bandwidth to figure this out. I'll just quit bread, but I just love bread.
You're Nordic.
Yeah, Nordic, and I wanted to have mock rye bread, like not the white fluffy stuff we have in the shops in the UK. I wanted proper bread. So I started to go online and figure out what else I can make it with when I'm not using shop bought flour that has corn and rice and sometimes even oats. What do I need to do? Who do I follow and stuff? And I started to make those. Then I wanted to make gluten-free sourdough bread. So just before pandemic, my husband bought me a course for Christmas, but then the pandemic hit and that was moved online. And during the lockdown, I learned to make gluten-free sourdough, and that person, Naomi Devlin, taught me what I could use instead of corn and rice. And I started experimenting, and then again, like you taste every single flour, what it tastes like, and do I like it or don't I like it? And some of them taste very healthy, grassy.
Such as?
Like sorghum, which is like this pearly white, very lovely grain, but often when you buy it from the shops, it can taste really grassy. And buckwheat has this sort of bitter almond kind of flavor. And sometimes millets start to go stale quite quickly. So they can also have this quite bitter taste to them. But I've only found like the yellow millets, but I know that there's several different types of millets around in the world, but in the UK, there's not too many. So there's a lot of choices with gluten-free grains. Corn and rice are used so much because they're cheap and they're relatively well tolerated, but they are quite starchy. So they're not the best whole grains, even brown rice. And there's also some say that if you eat a lot of rice flour, that because it's grown in China, that there might be quite a lot of like heavy metals in them. And that's why I also would advise not to eat all the time that like rice flour. Rice in itself is not as much as a problem, but like there's been studies with heavy metals with grain rice, and it's okay. But it's just when you eat flour, you just eat so much more of it that starts to go issues with some people. But it's not like dangerous levels. It's just that if you have choices, try to vary your diet and not eat too much of one kind, like in anything. So yeah, then I started to learn how to make bread, and the sourdough then took me to the place where, okay, so even if we all follow the same instructions, some succeed, some don't. I wonder why that is. And because I'm a chemical engineer by training, I can't not understand what's going on. So then I started to make my own experiments. Like, if I do it this way, I can do it. If I do it that way, I can't do it. What's going on? And then I realized different flours in different gluten-free flours, even with the same brand, can behave differently, and different psyllium husk powders, and if you use whole husks or if you use powders, they can be different, and that gluten-free baking is much more sensitive to our environment, our temperature, our humidity, and you need to learn to adjust it. And a lot of recipes don't do that. So they don't give you all the information you need to have to make a successful bread. And that's why then I created a course for it. So that others would know what I know, and they don't need to bake so many bricks or flat discs and waste money in flour and think that they have it wrong, that there's something they are doing wrong, or they don't have the skill to bake bread on their own, because it's just that it's temperamental. We need to know a few things before we go to this journey, and that's sort of what I'm like. I'm your Aunt Henna, just let me walk you through it. Let's look what happens. And because everyone's oven is different, your kitchen is different, it was very interesting to be on a course that's all over the world and have people try out the same recipe, and then everything goes like, what? Why are you managing to do it and I'm not, kind of thing. So,
and it can be things such that also the gut bacteria, or not gut bacteria, but the bacteria in your body, they're also on your hands.
Yeah.
And so I remember I did a sourdough baking course a few years ago, and the first thing that was said was, do not use like antibacterial anything on your hands, because you need all the stuff in your hands to bake the bread. And when my husband was kneading the dough or folding it, and I was doing it, his got really sticky and mine didn't. And it was really interesting how everyone on that course, they had different looking doughs, even if we did exactly the same thing, and they were in exactly the same room even. It's very temperamental, and that wasn't gluten free, but it was ancient grains, so also low in gluten compared to your standard. Yeah.
So that's the thing, that it all was way too interesting for me not to have a go. And I wanted proper bread that behaves like bread, that tastes like bread, because I feel the commercial stuff doesn't taste of anything. Like, there's no flavor to it. And I want to still have that grain feeling, that earthy, wholesome, rustic kind of experience, and to smell bread, freshly baked bread in my house.
Yes, I love that.
So
I mean, and even if some of the shop bought breads taste nice, I actually had one today that I bought, because I normally make these gluten-free rolls with teff flour, but I bought the bread today and actually it tastes really nice. But even so, you read the list, the ingredients list, and it's not ideal, is it? But what flours have you ended up using then on a regular basis? What would you recommend?
Oh yes, on my course, I use teff as the main flour because it makes a good bread on its own. You don't need anything added to it. But of course, if you use mix, you can then have your bread with different properties, and you can make it less dense, and you can add different flavors to it. So what my core flours now are, they're basically teff, and then I have millet, quinoa, and buckwheat. Sometimes I use sorghum. I save it a little bit because it's sometimes hard to find good quality sorghum. And I actually now grind my own flours using a stone mill, because I don't use the silica corn and rice. The price of the flours is a little bit higher, well, a lot higher than the, I think like 3 times higher than the cheaper ones. So when I buy it as grain, I get freshly ground flour that has all the enzymes and everything and so it works better for sourdough starters and also in the bread. And they don't have that bitter taste, which sometimes even the shop bought one can taste bitter when you buy it.
Oh, because it's already been ground quite a while ago.
Yes, and because the flux of that through the stores and everything can have different lengths, and it might be that it's been stored in too warm a place or whatever. Like during the pandemic, a lot of gluten-free stuff was tasting bitter when you opened the packet because they were probably being in the docks for quite a while before they were able to unload it all and that kind of thing. So yes, I basically use the whole grain flours, and then I use some potato starch and tapioca starch when I want fluffier breads and baguettes and that kind of thing.
Oh,
So,
I feel like making bread now. This sounds also amazing.
yeah.
I
But
can't
that's
actually...
the thing, that you need to sort of know what to use
Yeah.
for which purpose if you want to mix your own flours. Of course, commercial mixes are available, but because I can't use most of them, so I make my own. Well, I can't use any of them pretty much. So.
But that's actually maybe a silver lining. This has forced you to do this, and now you've got a different, I guess, a vocation, because I guess you're paying it forward so that other people don't need to have a bake flat breads, right? So you...
Yes, and because basically when you write a recipe, when you know of bread, you might be able to manage it better when you have like that feel to the dough. But gluten-free doughs feel quite different to regular doughs as well. And you need to bake them differently, you need to prove them differently. So the recipe is going to be quite long when you explain it all. And if you haven't got that sort of muscle memory, which I have built from a small child, like I remember, of course, then it was gluten baking, but I've been baking since I was a toddler with my mum because she baked every week and she made own breads and own buns and everything. And of course, when I had to go gluten free, I wanted to recreate the same things gluten free, and that's what I then did. So when an inexperienced gluten-free baker reads the recipe, the first thing is probably overwhelm. And then if they don't get it right in the first time, the automatic response is, I've done something wrong, I haven't got the skills. But then you have to explain that, okay, yes, but it's not you. It's just that your oven is different, or it was a hot day today, and that's why it was this, and that's why it was that. And it's just that helping them to trust themselves and ask questions and try again and tweak it a little bit, and you just can't write it down in that detail. So that's why a course is better for gluten-free baking, because the other option is to me standing with you in there in your kitchen and, okay, do this. Okay, we need to add a little bit of flour. We need to add a little bit of water. We need to do this.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'd love that. You can come to my kitchen. What kind of who does your course then, and what kind of feedback have you had from people who are doing it?
So my course at the moment, the people are all over the world. One is in Singapore. There's a couple of Germans, a few Spanish people, a few in UK, a couple in the States. So the need for better gluten-free bread seems to be global, and the need for non-starchy loaves and whole grain baking and organic and all those things. I think that's very global. And someone who buys my course is usually a person who's like, I am fed up with the shop bought breads, or I can't eat shop bought breads. They don't agree with me. Well, there's several reasons why that might be, why the gluten-free ones in the shops don't agree with you. But then they are wanting to try mine. And that's why I don't use buckwheat in the course, because a lot of people can't have buckwheat. So
whereas see, I would react to the quinoa.
Yeah. So that's why it's good to have options, and then, okay, we can try this and we can try that, and there's always something we can try. I'm sure there's more, like I haven't mentioned nut flours. You can also grind different nuts and use that as flour. And there's so many, and it always gets me so excited because there's so many things I haven't tried yet. So,
I just took a delivery of chestnut flour from Biona. Is it Biona? Is that how you pronounce it? Yeah, Biona Organics. What a fantastic website. I'm not paid to say this. I love the products they have. So chestnut flour, I tend to add a little bit of that into like pancakes, stuff like that, because it's just got a really, really lovely nutty flavor to it.
Yes, and there's sort of sweetness
Yeah.
that you get from it.
Yeah.
And it makes really wonderful, like these like crisp bread kind of things when you bake it like really thin, and or when you bake it as a thick one and then you slice it and then you dry it, so it makes like a crisp bread kind of thing. It's very tasty.
Ah, see, now I'm getting excited.
But I haven't got a proper recipe because I've just sort of added stuff and okay, this tastes nice. I wonder what I did with it, kind of thing.
Yeah,
When I'm in my creative mode, I'll just put everything together and see what happens.
That sounds very, very familiar because you, as you say, you've got a bit of muscle memory, so you kind of know. I remember I did like a gluten-free pizza base once based on a recipe, and it just said you need to bake it like it had to be really sort of not doughy, but like really just sort of spread it out on a tray, pre-bake it, then put the toppings on, shove it back in the oven again. And there's probably loads of different ways to make gluten-free pizza dough. But I just did that once, and since then I'm like, yeah, I remember how that felt. I remember the texture that I needed it to be, and then I keep making this once a week now for the kids because then my baby can eat it as well. And and people go, oh, well, what's the recipe? And I'm like, I don't know. It's like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, bit of teff, bit of rice flour, bit of buckwheat, bit of,
Yeah, and it's a bottoms of bags kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever I need to tidy up. So, but I guess that's why a course like what you're doing is so important. And gosh, if you also are creative and this is how you bake, that must have been a challenge for you as well to actually nail down exactly what it is to pass on to other people. Because
I really had to teach myself to take notes.
Yeah.
And only change one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Because I tend to tweak too many things. That's why it's gluten-free life tweaks, but try to tweak one thing at a time, not several things, because otherwise you don't know what was the thing that worked. So yeah, I've had to build more discipline. Of course, the chemical engineering background helps, working in labs and stuff. So I know how to isolate variables, but it has taught me to take notes, a lot of notes, and then remember where my notes are and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's been also very much fun. And just in a couple of weeks, I've had so many ideas what more I can do. And there's going to be more stuff that I do in the gluten-free realm. But I want to help people to enjoy their gluten-free lives and give more options. And I think the way to do it is baking and cooking more of your own stuff and not just settle with what's in the supermarkets.
Because as it going basically kind of full circle to where we started, it doesn't mean because it's gluten-free that it is a healthy product. And I think so many of us, we've kind of been misled to think that the free from section is where we need to go for gluten-free stuff. I think something that annoys me because I before I even had to do anything gluten-free, I still would go to that section because they've got some really good products that just happen to be gluten-free, but they're really good because they're just made from seeds or whatever. Or there's like the on-bar chocolates. I love on-bar chocolates. They're all there. But like it's not automatically so that everything there is healthy just because it's free from.
Almost the opposite.
Yeah, and sadly so that it's getting better, but sadly it's you've got to read ingredients really, really carefully, unfortunately, because when you take out the glue that is in gluten, you have to put something else in, and sometimes that is not necessarily a healthy alternative. So I think it's so important what you're doing, that you're sharing these things and also making it doable for people, because it can, I mean, some of the gluten-free recipes that I see, they're like the list of the ingredients, I mean, it's just insane.
Yes, and I'm still in the process of working it out, but I think what happens with gluten-free recipes a little bit like people take someone else's recipe and then they add to it, and then they make it their own in some way. But no one's like checking that are these all needed in the recipe? Does it make a difference when we use these? Because there's like typical is that vinegar you add into recipe because yeast works better in acidic conditions. But I've never found it necessary, so I've just left it out. And my whole point was, when I built my recipes, is that you buy minimum amount of ingredients, because you need to start from somewhere, and when you have minimum amount of ingredients, you have minimum ways for that to be different. So you can be better rail in the thing that, okay, if we all use just one flour, it's just that batch of flour maybe is different, or a different manufacturer, but it's not that much different if you have 3 flours and then you're figuring out which one is the different one, kind of thing. So I thought, well, let's start the basics so you understand what needs to happen and how it behaves and how you bake it, and how the water amount needs to be adjusted when you have hot weather or when you have cold weather, etc. And then you can get creative when you're building your confidence, because everyone likes their bread a little bit different, I feel. Like perfect bread, pretty much everyone says a different thing.
Yeah.
And shop-bought breads are great that they're getting better, and it's great that we have the options. But there was just Coeliac UK's cost of living crisis price comparison. And the gluten-free breads are over 4 to up to 7 times more expensive than the shop gluten counterparts. And if you constantly eat bread, that's quite an expensive way to live. So when you bake your own, even if I use the expensive flours, I've managed to get it to even price or just above with electricity. But I don't have the weirdness in there. And I know that this doesn't upset my stomach. And I've noticed that when I eat my own bread, that's the best how my system works.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. How are you feeling now then? Was it 4 years down the line?
Yes, 4 years. So it took, like I said, it took about 2 years when I started to feel like now I'm back to myself. Like now I'm feeling me again. And it was like this massive car crash pile-up that I had the symptom of the day, that some weird symptom came up, and I wonder what that is. And I think it was sort of like if you would have this massive control room where all the things are alarming and it's always blaring and you don't know what is wrong, so eventually you just mute it and don't care what it is. So when you then take away the big buzzer which sort of covered everything underneath it, then there's these little problems that you start to uncover. So that process took a long time. And but now I like literally notice that, oh, I wasn't a lazy person. I just literally got tired so easily. Like I forgot to say that it was like every day I ran out of energy 2 p.m. And it was literally like a wind up toy, like running out of power. And I remember most of my life I've been very tired in the mornings. And I thought that it's just that, oh, I didn't sleep enough or this and that. But now when I've healed, like got the celiac under control, I'm suddenly not tired in the mornings. When I'm glutened by accident, then I suddenly notice that, oh yes, I'm tired in the mornings again. So that's why if I'm accidentally glutened, I notice straight away.
Wow. I think it's so important that you're sharing this, because I'm sure there will be people listening going, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why I've been like XYZ for so long.
Yeah.
But you think, and I think, I wonder if that's also like a female thing. We just don't go to the doctor because we feel like, how will anyone take me seriously? I'm tired. Yes, you're a person, you've got a job, you've got children or whatever, you know, of course you'll be tired. But actually, if you know that this doesn't feel right,
yeah,
it's good to have somebody else voice that and say, look, this was the case for me, and it's not anymore.
Yeah, and I think because a lot of people think that celiac disease is just tummy troubles, and you get an upset stomach, or you get diarrhea, or you get constipation. That's the thing with celiac. You can get either constipated or diarrhea, or you get sick, or you get bloated, you get cramps, and it's like 7 things in one kind of thing. And that's why it's so hard for doctors to know what's going on. And also there's non-stomach related issues like the tiredness and brain fog. And quite typically, you might be anemic, or you might have vitamin D deficiency. And if celiac disease goes untreated for a long time, you might develop osteoporosis because you're not absorbing calcium. And then you could have like something called gluten ataxia, which is like tingling nerve issues, like tingling hands and trouble speaking and managing your movements and that kind of stuff. So quite severe stuff. But it's because your nerve ends start to get damaged of all the malnutrition and the autoimmune response. And so I had this thing that when I held my phone up, my hands started to go numb. And I always blamed my shoulders and this and that. And I said to the doctor that, can this be celiac related after I got my diagnosis? No, that's not a symptom. But now everyone knows that gluten ataxia is a thing, and neuropathy with, so all sorts of neurological symptoms with celiac disease can happen. And I haven't had that after I got gluten free. So there's all these weirdnesses, and fertility issues can be also undiagnosed celiac disease can be behind it all, and not always, but sometimes. So it's
you mentioned also, but it is. But you mentioned also actually that I think did we say like approximately 1 in 100 have celiac disease? Yes. But actually, if there's somebody close to you, like in your case, your dad, then the chance goes down to 1 in 10.
Yes. So if your first line relative has celiac disease, because it's down to your genes, like have you got the gene that makes you susceptible to celiac disease? If you don't have the genes, it's highly unlikely that you have it, and or get it. So it's 10 times more likely to get it. So in the UK population, it's about estimated that it's 1 in 100 when you do the math that gets celiac disease. And at the moment, I think I checked it, it was 36% have been diagnosed in the UK. So there's quite a lot of undiagnosed celiacs around. And that's why this year Celiac UK really was talking about the less typical symptoms of celiac disease, and that people would think that, okay, so I have had these weird health things going on. I need to check with my doctor, maybe this could be celiac disease. And Celiac UK has this self-assessment tool, like if you Google Celiac UK symptom checker, it has this self-assessment form. You can put your symptoms in, and then they say if there's reason to suspect celiac disease. And if your doctor is like, oh, I don't know if it's worth the test, and you're tired all the time because you have so much going on, then you can say, yes, but according to this self-assessment tool, it says it's a good idea. So why wouldn't you humor me and just test it? Because it's one blood test, then gives you an indication whether that should be studied for or investigated forward, kind of thing. So
that's important. Let's add that to the show notes, how you can check for that. I think this is so helpful. I want to know more about it.
And that was the issue that I said I can talk to you about this 10 days.
I think, but I think it's brilliant, because there will be also people who haven't got celiac disease, but who know that I react to too much or any, or certain types. As I said, I'm fine if I bake my own bread at home. I tend to use like einkorn or emmer, and I tend to add in a little bit of teff just for the flavor. And I'm absolutely fine with that because I leave it to prove most of the day, and then I bake it. But if I buy shop bought bread, just normal bread, I struggle unless it's like really, really good quality bread. I struggle. So I think even for people who haven't got a diagnosis, I think it could be useful to learn how to use these different flours. And the flours you use, I mean, teff, for example, is incredibly nutritious. It's got so much fiber in it, so much prebiotic fiber in it. It is a fantastic flour to be making to be baking with anyway. So I think anyone can benefit from this.
Yeah, like there's crazy amounts of magnesium and iron in it, and 22 grams of fiber per 100 grams.
Yeah.
No flour does that.
No, I mean it's incredible. We need more fiber. It helps us with so much. I mean, it's just, I don't think we eat enough fiber in our diet as it is, and that's why I always say also about teff. It just, when in doubt, add a bit of it to your bread, and you will soon see that you'll have no problems going to the toilet. So
no, yeah, it's like brilliant, and just adding more whole grains in, and of course with people who avoid gluten for whatever reason, that's a wonderful flour to use, but you can use it also with gluten flours because then it just adds to the nutrition.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it teff doesn't have the unpalatable strong flavors. Sometimes some people might be, oh, this is a little bit beetrooty, but when you use it as a flour, it doesn't come across. So it's really good.
Yeah, no, we love it. We love it. And I guess you can mix it with a bit of tapioca for fluffy pancakes.
Yes, and I made those. I don't know if you ever looked at my blog. I make the spinach pancakes, which is like when Nordics do the nettle pancakes. It's sort of like the same thing. So spinach and teff, and I think mine is like a cup of teff and cup of milk. It's on my website anyway, and then 3 eggs so that it holds together, because teff can be a little bit brittle when you make it as pancakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very good.
I
love grass mix because in the morning when I'm really lazy, I just use it because it's really quick.
Yeah. They got a good pancake mix, don't they?
Yeah.
No, we love a bit of lovegrass Ethiopia flour here as well. So we use an awful lot of it. Listen, thank you so much for this. I'm sat in this insanely hot room, so I'm going to call it a day. I mean, it's like 9 p.m. here, and it's just still so warm.
It is.
Incredible. Thank you so much for taking your time to talk to us. And I'm going to be posting some of these websites in the show notes. If you want to learn more about celiac disease, you can find it out there. And if you want to find out about how to work with you, we'll add your website into this. And anything I've forgotten, I guess we'll post that in the show notes as well. But thank you so much for sharing your story and for sharing your passion for bread. I feel like I need to do a course now.
Yeah, everyone's welcome. I have the monthly one coming after the summer holidays, but the one bulk on Facebook, in a Facebook group, is already online, so it's ready to go.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Henna. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. You've been listening to the Small Steps to Wellness show with Mari Craig. I am passionate about helping mums get their energy back through simple nutritional changes, because we know that if mummy is happy, the family is happy. If you would like to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram under @smallstepstowellness, or visit my website, smallstepstowellness.info. Speak to you soon.